Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 3rd of September 2024. Boys are back at school. This is normal kind of scheduling. I'm a little bit later today, trying to get all my ducks in a row. They are subsequently all rowed up, which is fantastic. So let's go for it. The Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the caveats apply, and you can find the caveats to this list in the description to the video below, so I don't have to repeat them daily to you. 1,360 is a very high number of personnel lost by the Russians. So that's a good day at the office for the Ukrainians and probably reflects that the Russians are attacking. And you see that by the tank losses being just a tad above the daily average, which is a good day for the tanks. We've seen a lot of days of sort of 4 and 5. So to lose double that is good. 35 AFVs. Armoured fighting vehicles, APCs, MRAPs and IFVs, all the kind of troop carrying fighting vehicles. 35 of those lost. That's a tremendously high number in that category, and also would indicate that the Russians are attacking. Those tank losses and IFV losses are very or fairly high. So that's over that is pretty much double the daily average, I think, troop carrying AFVs. And now we know that the Russians are attacking, obviously, in Pokrovsk region, but also further down there, Vuhledar. They're doing some flanking attacks on Vuhledar. It's looking very bad for the Ukrainians down on that southern dog leg of the front line between Donetsk and on the way to Zaporizhia. But that southeastern area of Donetsk, Vuhledar, is not a good place to be at the moment. The Russians are taking advantage of perhaps the Kursk operation, diverting Ukrainian resources, or just throwing everything they can at every perceived weakness. This has been on the cards for some time because the Russians have been approaching that road just northeast of Vuhledar, between Konstantinivka and Vodyane and Vuhledar, and it was only a matter of time before they were going to try and take Vuhledar itself. So I think you are seeing an uptick in troops and fighting vehicles precisely because the Russians are attacking in some big ways in a number of places. But when they attack, they lose a lot of stuff and a lot of people. 18 artillery systems is actually lower than we are used to seeing. It's around about the daily average. But considering we've seen many weeks of 40 to 50 and beyond artillery systems taken out, that's low. No MLRS, no anti-aircraft warfare systems, 47 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 9 pieces of special equipment. So I think, yeah, some good categories there for the Ukrainians and some lower categories as well. Andrew Perpetua didn't give us any updates for the last 2 days, and then finally gave us an update, 2 on the trot yesterday. He said, guys, the number of losses on Sunday are stupidly enormous, like 2 times the last record largest day. Absolutely insane numbers. So these are the numbers for September the 1st. Holy cow. That is double the record day, as he said. And then we'll go back to August the 31st because we didn't look at these stats. He released them one after the other. Just interesting to go through these. I'll try not to dwell too much, but we can see that combat asset losses, the Russians have lost more than the Ukrainians, but both sides losing a fair number. That's because they're both attacking in, Ukrainian Kursk, Russia, all along the eastern front. Okay, let's look at the Ukrainian stats to see if there's anything major that's been lost. Not really in the artillery section. The tank section losing quite a few. 3 destroyed, 4 damaged, but mainly older tanks, although some of these older tanks are newly refurbished and whatnot. So it is sometimes a bit of a false claim to say, oh, that's just an old tank that's not very good, so don't worry about losing that one. They're all highly valuable, and some tanks that might look old are actually pretty decent. Only 1 IFV, BMP destroyed, some APCs, about 50-50 destroyed and abandoned, 2 damaged. Most of the actually, no, that's not true. About half of them are older. Soviet pieces of kit, and half of them are Humvees and M13s, but not incredibly highly valuable. A couple of MRAPs there, Western provided ones, and a bunch of civilian vehicles. Okay, and trucks. But actually, all the trucks at the bottom and these civilian vehicles in black are ones that, so that's that grain truck convoy that was hit by an Iskander. And the ones below are just cars and SUVs, that the civilian cars driven by civilians that the Russians have targeted in what looks rather like a war crime. Okay, when we look at the Russian losses, so a BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system destroyed there. Zu-23, that's anti-aircraft sort of cannon. Tank captured, another T-80 BVM captured. The Ukrainians captured a number of those up in Kursk. And a range of other tanks destroyed and damaged. Infantry fighting vehicles, mainly most of those destroyed and abandoned. Only a couple damaged there. And the same with the APCs. So losing quite a lot of kit. And then when we come down to trucks, a few of those, a lot of Desert Cross 1000-3, so those are your Golf buggies. 8 of those destroyed, or 100% of those ATVs destroyed, and then a bunch of civilian vehicles destroyed. So really nothing of great value in the list. Multiple launch rocket system. Russians having a slightly worse day than the Ukrainians there a couple of days back, but both of them losing quite a bit of kit. Then when we come to yesterday's stats, no wonder it took him a long time to compile this list. It's phenomenal. Right, when you look at the combat asset losses, so if you can make it out at all, the yellow there to the orange and sort of pinkish down at the bottom, that gives you that much. Oh my goodness. So I'm assuming a sort of 5-to-1 combat asset loss ratio of Russian to Ukrainian. And in total, goodness me, what, a 7-to-1 loss ratio? That's a guess. Could it be more? Could it be less? I don't know. Just massive, massive numbers there. Okay, let's try and work out what the Ukrainians... I cannot expand that any more than I have, so sorry if you can't really read that. The Ukrainians have lost a P-18 Malachite radar. That's fairly high value, a piece of kit from a Lancet attack. Video seems... so he thinks that could be a decoy. That is destroyed, but it could well be a decoy. We've also got a command and control vehicle, an M577, another one of those taken out by an FPV drone. That's destroyed. Some comms equipment, a few boats damaged in there, a number of tanks, nothing too valuable as in there, no Abrams, no Charlie 2s. Infantry fighting vehicles, a couple of Bradleys damaged. They seem to be getting a few Bradleys damaged at the moment, luckily not destroyed, so hopefully they can be fixed up. But I'm pretty sure they'll need another consignment of Bradleys at some point imminently. They're not announcing any. They haven't announced any. But there are some rumours that you hear that they do get Bradleys, or that there have been a number ready to go. Whether they have gone, I don't know. Rumours are rumours, right? Hearsay. APCs, a couple of those, a couple of MRAPs and whatnot. Nothing too serious there. Fairly small list. Considering what the Russians have lost. Now, an awful lot of comms equipment, admittedly. A Mi-8 helicopter. I presume that's the one that was actually lost over in Kamchatka. Interesting to include that because it's not a military helicopter unless there's another one. Now, having said that, there's news today of another Mi-8 lost in Russia. Another accident, though. But yeah, I don't know which one that is. I haven't checked out the link. Then some electronic warfare, a pickup truck with EW loaded, a lot of comms equipment listed. And then, goodness me, a huge dump of, I presume, just one montage of artillery getting damaged there. FPV drone barrel destroyed. You get a lot of these FPV drone bits of footage now looking, and I think it's Magyar's birds. Certainly he's done that before, where he's released footage of them just aiming at particular parts of the barrel to destroy the barrel. They know what they're doing, so there will be damage. They are fixable, but do the Russians have the barrels? Unlikely. Massive amount of D30s there. Huge list of artillery. You can add to that a couple of other pieces of artillery, self-propelled guns and whatnot. destroyed at the top of the list and a few damaged. Then we come down to tanks, just a massive list of tanks, including 5 tracked garden sheds where they do the Mad Max and whack on the corrugated iron and whatnot, and then actually a couple of turtle tanks, which I don't know how he differentiates those. Possibly with the turtle tanks they can still use a turret. I don't know, but anyway, a couple of those abandoned. So yeah, quite a few Mad Max iterations there. And then a lot of other tanks, both destroyed and damaged. Infantry fighting vehicles, a huge list of losses there. About 50% of them destroyed and abandoned. Maybe a touch over. What do we have here? Mainly BTRs, BMPs, a lot of BTR 82s, to be honest, there. And then a few BMPs, mainly BMP2s. APCs, they've only lost 5. I say only, compared to the loss of infantry fighting vehicles and tanks. Yeah, so trucks there, quite a list of trucks, considering we haven't seen so many trucks recently. I don't think the Russians have quite as many military trucks as they did at the beginning of the war. That's probably an understatement. And then when we come on to civilian vehicles, just a mass of those destroyed, and then a whole load damaged as well. And then some unknown vehicles right at the bottom where they're just so completely destroyed you can't work out what they are, and a few ATVs thrown in for good measure. So this is a massive loss for the Russians. I think this represents probably a number of days worth of, maybe even weeks worth of losses that are compiled together with different drops of videos of montages, so that all those artillery pieces, they would have been lost no doubt over several weeks. One unit puts in their montage and then you add it to the list. So that's not all from, as mentioned, the last 24 hours, but that is exactly what the Ukrainians would want to see. This is a really massive loss for the Russians. Nothing insanely valuable though, no huge anti-aircraft warfare system. There is a helicopter at the top of that. Unfortunately, just don't know where that was from. Now, as I've told you before, Andrew is also totting up the visually confirmed deaths of Russian soldiers. Now, it's a pretty macabre thing to do, but it is useful to get an idea of trends and to get an idea of the differential between the reality at the war, between what is caught on socials and what is claimed by the Ukrainian General Staff. So last time we dipped into this, the average was about 65 visually confirmed human beings being killed every day. And of course this is killed, whereas the General Staff figures of personnel losses include wounded, killed, wounded, captured and deserted. So this is only dealing with the killed. He says in the last day he has seen video evidence of 98 human beings, like Russian soldiers, being killed, and that gives 1,005 in the last 13 days, which gives an average, if I'm not mistaken, of about 77, is it, something like that, a day, which is an uptick from what we did see the last time we worked out the average is about 65. So we are a long way off, obviously, 1,360, as you would expect. You're not going to ever remotely get near a one-to-one visually confirmed to what the General Staff say. General Staff are going to be including all sorts of claims to do with, bases and command centers and this and that, and buildings getting destroyed that have maybe 10 people in, but you don't know, you're not going to see all of those 10 people pass away or get injured. You don't know the ratio of killed to injured. You just know that the building collapsed. You think there was maybe 10 people in there. So there's a lot of guesstimation here, I think, in that headline figure for the General Staff, whereas Andrew Perpetua's given you the exact number of people who have been seen to have died on video, caught on video in the last 24 hours, submitted to the internet in the last 24 hours. Okay, now I meant to include this in my military aid video talking about different equipment that's being used yesterday, but I just randomly forgot. So this was doing around big time yesterday. I don't know what I think about this. I think it's pretty horrific because it's a weapon of war, and it's can't imagine being caught under that. I also look at this from an environmental point of view, and it's very sad. But here we have a Ukrainian drone dropping thermite along a tree line, And this is, it's got a canister of thermite that is dropping. This is a new thing. Haven't seen this before. We've seen this kind of weapon be used. We've seen incendiary munitions being exploded over troops on both sides, mainly the Russians using incendiary. It's not illegal, but it is pretty horrific. You might think that actually caught some ammunition in there. So this is where clearing out a tree line. There could be a trench built down that tree line, and what you're seeing is thermite be dropped along that tree line. I'd imagine that is incredibly effective, rather than trying to hit that with massive amounts of ammunition that they don't have. You've got one thermite canister, and that takes out basically an entire tree line and flushes out, I would assume, the troops from there, and maybe takes out equipment as well. Right, new Ukrainian tactic to clear entrenched enemy lines, says Osint Yuri Kikaski. The AFU has begun deploying drones that carry thermite canisters that are flown over tree lines occupied by the enemy. Thermite consists of a chemically balanced mixture of metal powder reactant, typically aluminium, and metal powder oxidant, typically ferric oxide. When ignited, a self-sustaining exothermic reaction occurs that is almost impossible to extinguish, creating molten metal with a temperature of 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, 2,500 degrees Celsius. Russian sources describe it as quite dangerous and unpleasant. That is something of an understatement. So that's all I have to say about that. It just, looks pretty horrific, that, but also looks incredibly effective. Now, War Translated, this was in response to Russian reporter Marat Karulian says on TV that in Kursk the Russians have a huge advantage in drones and other types of weapons, and that the Ukrainian drones are homemade and therefore low quality. So that is a Russian reporter saying that. War Translated, Dmitry says more on this. Russian soldiers notice a significant superiority in FPV and Mavic drones for the Ukrainian side in Kursk, but write that Lancer, Orlan and Geran are supplied in good numbers. Still, they say that Ukrainians can use FPV with far more freedom. So this is going against these are Russian soldiers' claims going against Russian reporters, propagandists' claims, and you can pretty much imagine that one is far more believable than the other. It's also worth noting that Yevgeny, what's his name, Fedorov, I think, a State Duma representative, Russian parliamentarian, said today that Kursk is a lot worse than you guys realise, as in for the Russians. So that's worth taking into account. Take all these kinds with a pinch of salt. Says this Russian, I would generally emphasise one effing important point. Gerans, Orlans, Lancets, etc. are of course awesome. Their production is really increasing. The fighters at the front are using them. It's not like they have mountains of them, but there is no shortage right now. We're talking about the units that have been using these birds almost from the beginning of the operation. Once again, only for those units that initially managed to secure these supplies. In other words, the reconnaissance drones, the mid-range reconnaissance drones and mid-range attack drones, such as Shahids, the Garans, but also Lancets and Orlan reconnaissance drones, they've got enough of these, they've increased the supply, and the units have always been using them, have no problem with them. Can't speak to any other units, but certainly the ones that usually use them are doing a pretty good job. But, and I think important but, in addition to Lancets and Orlans, the front really needs Mavic, so the Chinese quadcopters and hexacopters and whatnot, and first-person view drones. And the situation with Mavics and FPVs is many of our units are really bad. And the ratio here is clearly on the side of the Ukrainians. According to the modest observations personally on the contact line, our guys have 2 Mavics in the sky. The Ukrainians have 3 to 5. Our guys can afford to launch 2 to 3 FPVs per target per day. A normal day, not an assault. A Ukrainian on the same weekday can launch 5 to 6 at one target. So we're talking about the Ukrainians using double the amount of FPV drones, which means that they should be able to cause twice the amount of damage. That's huge. And one more thing, those cheerful deliveries of such small drones from the Ministry of Defense that Karulian is talking about, they may exist. So this Russian reporter that's saying that in Kursk, the Russians have a huge advantage in drone usage. So he's saying that those drones may exist, but they're not regular, and the Mavics and FPVs are consumables, a real consumable. They need to be delivered to units regularly, so that guys have at least 4 to 5 Mavics per month for 2 to 3 pilots, and at least 10 FPV drones per pilot per day. Then we can say that everything is more or less okay with that, with our birds, our drones. But for now, things are so-so with them, not super deplorable, but still far from superiority in the sky. So in other words, it's not terrible, but the Ukrainians are operating at twice the capacity we are in FPV drones and Mavics. Speaking about those all-lands, there are more and more footage like this coming out. So this is drone-on-drone warfare. Andrew here says the speed of the FPV drone compared to the reconnaissance drone is incredible. So you've got a reconnaissance drone here. You'll see it come into view there. It's basically that smudge. And this is the FPV drone above it, so it's keeping pace with it. Also being able to speed its way down to it, obviously with the help of some gravity there. And Bosch takes out the tail. Now, they're apparently doing quite well at taking out a number of these reconnaissance drones. Like we said, weeks, months and years even ago, right at the beginning of this war, the complaint was that the Russians have a much more effective use of Orlan 10s and Orlan 30s. These cheap and cheerful but incredibly effective long range or medium range reconnaissance drones, long range actually, and they were using them to spot for missiles and etc. The Ukrainians had then lost, in the last sort of year, lost a whole heap of highly valuable equipment as a result of these spotted drones. And so how do they deal with them? One option is to use things like propeller aircraft, such as Yak-52, put someone with a shotgun in the back, take them out of the sky. You've got air defense systems taking them out. You've got airplanes taking them out, like jets, normal, and stuff like that. Small arms fire, but actually they're starting to fly higher and higher. So you are now seeing drone-on-drone warfare being a much more prevalent phenomenon. The Ukrainians have adapted. They're using FPV drones really effectively in their battle on those reconnaissance drones. Anyway, in temporarily occupied Mariupol, partisans have sabotaged a railway. According to Mariupol City Council, it's reported that a transformer on a railway branch was burned in the city. It's actively used by the Russian military to transport equipment. Good news there. Another railway issue here. The Moscow locomotive repair plant is on fire. Details are being clarified. That was taken from Andronovka village, I presume in the Moscow area. A near train collision in the Ryazan direction. There are issues with the Russian railway system as it is trying to deal with all of the threats and the issues from not just strikes, but also Ukrainians taking control of Sudzha in Kursk, may have given them information on railway network. They've got partisans, which would allow them to strike, much more effectively. But also partisans and sabotage and so on and so forth. So lots of stuff going on, being challenging for the Russian railway system. Now, absolutely unreal, says John Ridge here. What's he talking about? This is a geolocation that's caused quite a bit of a stir. And it's caused a stir because it's really quite clever. So the claim was that the Russians were making a claim that they were using a Mi-28NM, which is one of these electronic warfare helicopters, and they were operating in the Kursk region and provided footage to say, look, this is us operating in the Kursk region. But actually, it was geolocated by someone very clever who took a screen grab and enlarged it to look at reflections on the video camera or on the helicopter, and then was able to kind of reverse geolocate it or whatever to what the helicopter was looking at. Absolutely incredible. And showed that actually it was operating not in the Kursk region, but was operating in Kremovo in the Donetsk region. So that's near Bakhmut. It's just a little thing to add there, but it's great, some of the work that the open source intelligence community do. Incredible stuff there. Right, moving on to distant strikes. Overnight, Russia launched 35 Shahed drones into Ukraine, of which 27 were shot down. Another 6 crashed, so electronic warfare having an effect there probably. That gives 33, so 2 possibly got through and hit their targets. Of course, everything that goes up must come down, and some of these will be causing damage on the ground nevertheless. Interesting that yet again another Shahed found its way to Belarus, so I don't know if that's included in the 6 or in the 2 that didn't get anywhere. But Russia's launching Shaheds. Sorry, no, that was yesterday. No, those are Belarus. The one that went to Belarus and got shot down. No, this is a different Belarus. Sorry, I was getting myself confused. Right, rewind. So Russia is launching Shaheds from Belarus for the first time in the war. And this is the equivalent of Ukraine launching missiles at Russia from NATO territory. Russia continues to escalate while US continues its failed policy of escalation management with restrictions on Ukraine. Ukraine is being attacked today from Belarus and does not have any permission to strike the troops launching these drones at their country. US stops Ukraine from defending itself from Russian missile and drone strikes being launched from Belarus and Russia. It's an insane policy. So the rumor is that, for the first time they've launched Shaheds from Belarus. What is Ukraine able to do about that, considering they can't even shoot down the missiles sent from, or shoot down the planes that take out the missiles in the air bases in Russia? So the chance of being able to do anything about Belarus is obviously, it's never going to happen. So last night, Russia launched an attack on railway infrastructure, hitting facilities and rolling stock in the Sumy and Dnipropetrovsk regions. I don't know why this has not happened previously to a huge extent. Russia has spent an awful lot of this war hitting civilian infrastructure and doing terrible things and war criminal things, rather than being a lot cleverer and using resources efficiently to take out Ukrainian infrastructure in a much more systematic manner. They just, I don't know, they've not done a very good job at this war, but who am I to judge? Fortunately, there were no casualties. Additionally, a railway workers' home in Pokrovsk, a key evacuation hub, was struck by artillery fire, injuring the worker and the wife, who were hospitalized. So possibly railway infrastructure being targeted by the Russians there. Now, yesterday, Russia struck a residential area of Zaporizhia. It's getting quite a bit of press. A hotel was hit. Yet again, another hotel hit. 38-year-old woman and 8-year-old son were killed in the attack. Their 12-year-old daughter was rescued from under the rubble and hospitalized. A 43-year-old man was also injured. 12-year-old girl has fractured limbs, wounds, burns to 45% of her body, and traumatic shock. She's in intensive care. Doctors are providing all necessary assistance. The man is in moderate condition in surgery with fractured sternum and shrapnel wound to the right thigh. Russia continues terrorizing civilians. And there you go. That's what Russia does, and it does it every single day. Russian Telegram channels report that a military airfield last night in the Tver region in Russia was under a drone attack. I have a feeling this is north of Moscow, which is, I think, incredibly significant. So air defense was going pretty nuts there. You can see a number of videos showing the air defense missiles. I'm actually not going to play the sound because YouTube doesn't like it. But yeah, a lot of ordnance getting sent up into the air. And I don't know whether that's interceptors. It looks rather like tracer bullets for 1 in like 5 rounds or something. But air defense was really active of all sorts in the Tver area. So an airfield was targeted. Have absolutely no information on what happened, what attacked it, whether there was any success. Right, moving on to previous strikes over the last week or so. Gazprom Neft Moscow refinery suspended operations at combined refining unit Europlus. That includes crude distillation unit CDU6 after a fire on Sunday, according to Reuters. So a refinery taken out in that strike on Sunday. We also have this Russian Telegram channels write that the following about the attack on Konokovo power station in Russia's Tver region. So that was another famous strike where there wasn't a massive amount of imagery coming out from the huge Ukrainian strikes, the huge wave of strikes on, was it Sunday? Saturday to Sunday. Anyway, Konakovo, the power station, had that drone that hit the side of it. Then you had part of the gas substation hit just nearby it as well. Anyway, Konakovo power station, one of the largest power plants in the USSR and the Russian Federation, located deep into the Russian rear, which burned today as a result of the Ukrainian airstrike, is not only a strong spectacle, I did not think I'd live to see such a thing, but also a demonstration of new increased capabilities of the armed forces of Ukraine and a new level of problems for the Russian Federation. The drones hit the gas distribution unit of the station and it powerfully exploded and burst into flames. Imagine how many large gas distribution nodes in the leading electric power stations, which for the last 4 decades have been actively converted to natural assets of Russia, and the largest nodes of the gas transportation system and underground gas storages are in the European part of Russia, which is now almost all reachable by Ukrainian drones. All in all, 100 drones flying to the targets would be enough to knock it all out for months. That is the risk that Russia is facing at the moment. If Ukraine decides to go hell for leather on Russian energy infrastructure, the Russians could be in for a bit of a tough time. Now, going back to the Proletarsk oil depot that was on fire for 16 days. This is a satellite image is emerging showing the aftermath of the fire there. Radio Svoboda compared satellite images from before and after. It claims that some 40 of those units have been taken out. I don't know, is that right? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Yeah, there will be 40 there. These ones over here, I don't know whether that was a kerosene, whether kerosene was over here. There was talk that the kerosene did catch fire. I don't know if it actually did, but you can see that Proletarsk is probably one of the most, the scale of the damage there was probably one of the biggest to any oil depot that has been struck during this war. Now, the Moscow refinery shuts down oil refining unit after the drone attack. Now, that's what we just heard, but actually the repair could take 5 to 6 days. So not massively significant in time taken out, but then that could also be a bit of propaganda, or I could be sugarcoating it or not. I don't know. Right. Moving on to just another nugget concerning strikes recently. Just look at the size of that trench. Absolutely incredible. And the size of that warhead. So that's an unexploded warhead from a Kinzhal KH-47 Kinzhal hypersonic missile that was neutralized in Ukraine's region. Cost of such a missile starts at $10 million. That's a pretty expensive bit of kit. This one didn't go off, I presume. I mean, is that the crater from the subsequent controlled explosion? I don't know, but absolutely massive. And then the Ukrainians apparently used a Ukrainian long-range missile drone called the Palyantsia that we've mentioned a number of times recently. Apparently first struck at an ammunition depot in Voronezh in Russia. Now has supposedly been used against a military target for the first time in temporarily occupied Crimea. It was a complex operation and the target was successfully hit, according to Ukrainians. Have no more information about that and even when that took place. But it's good to see this range of ordnance being used against Russia by the Ukrainians, much of it indigenously manufactured, designed and manufactured. Okay, Jay Kiev reports that Ukrainian people will now face not only Russian and North Korean missiles, but US forbids that the US forbids us from doing anything about, but now Iranian missiles as well. So Bloomberg has released an article saying Ukraine allies expect Iran to ship missiles to Russia imminently. Might be something to do with some sanctions running out or something like that. Anyway, deliveries would mark a worrying development. People say US and NATO have repeatedly warned Tehran against shipments. Having said that, there are also other claims that they've been doing that anyway, and this isn't actually anything particularly new, or it is something new and they are going to soon, the Russians are soon going to get their hands on even more ballistic missiles to be able to throw at Ukraine. And meanwhile, Ukraine still remain restricted. Okay, moving on from that though, there's more to this story, says War translated in a similar fashion to one he added to earlier. So the original was Kursk Panic. War correspondent Roman Saponkov reports that after rumours circulated about Ukrainians breaking through the Lvov-Kursk highway last night, local self-defense forces, armed civilians, opened friendly fire, nearly killing Russian soldiers. The first time that's happened. So he says a Russian serviceman shared on Telegram about his interactions with the Kursk territorial defense. He described the situation as complete chaos, with the territorial defense forces more likely to harm each other than the Ukrainians. Some members are in a constant state of paralyzing panic, imagining Ukrainians everywhere and growing suspicious of their fellow Russians. Quote, there was a security at our volunteer point. I won't discuss the specifics of the grossest unthinkable violations of basic safety rules, which this security couldn't care less about. As a guest, I carefully tried to hint to them there. It was useless, but this security tried to compensate for its complete professional incompetence with a paranoid suspicion of everyone around. Only show-offs, abundantly hung with chevrons, inspired their unconditional trust. For example, in tense, smiling, friendly conversations, I was constantly asked questions that were obviously attempts to get through to me. Moreover, the person asking the question was apparently sure that he was playing a subtle game and did not understand that all this was completely obvious. They created an atmosphere as if there was a continuous battle going on around us. Fear paralyzes the brain. They don't have the highest IQ there anyway, and here it's shrunk to the point of being unable to put two and two together. Constant screams in the air. The Ukrainians, the hohos, are bypassing our sniper. They've come on our frequencies and are saying that we're screwed. I can hear Ukrainian speech, saboteurs on the left, saboteurs on the right, constant intelligence that will be surrounded tonight, every night. Before this trip, I was 100% sure that territorial defense needed to be armed. Now I'm not so sure. They're a completely morally unprepared, unstable people. These are. Should I give them weapons? I just don't know. Yes, some of them, in another area I think, were trained by Wagner, but these guys apparently aren't there. And even if people are morons, they can only act normally under the strict guidance of normal commanders. But what if morons are led by the same morons? And this is a real damning indictment. It goes on and on about how really problematic it is in the Kursk area. What I saw in the territorial defense in the Kursk region is a sad sight. It's panic, hysteria, unprofessionalism, and chaotic runs. If you give them normal weapons, it's unknown that who they will shoot more, the Ukrainians, the army, or each other. If they're conducting combat operations somewhere, then most likely these are shootouts with the sky and trees. It's obvious that in addition to weapons, communications, and training, they do not have the main thing in war, a combat mission, and they're trying to invent it for themselves on the fly. These units are definitely not suitable for maneuver warfare, but I think there would be a fine option that they can handle with their level of organisation. Defence of the second line in sectors, of course, with the presence of weapons, AK, PK, RPG, with sufficient ammo plus communications. Let's put the guys in camouflage positions with a certain sector. They are on duty. They received an order that they were being approached, or they saw it themselves, reported it, were confirmed that it was not our own. They worked, inflicted damage, changed their position, reported it. I think they should have been prepared for such scenarios. That would have been useful, simple, understandable, and in principle accessible. Of course, sitting in a position for a week, 2, 3 is boring, but at least these are eyes, and there is information that there are no Ukrainians in the sector of the position at the moment. And there is a high probability that if the Ukrainians appear, they will not cut them down quietly, but there will be a clash, and the enemy will make himself known, and if they do cut them down, then a completely set up roll call of posts will reveal this within a maximum of an hour. I don't really understand that last paragraph. But the point is that there is absolute chaos within the ranks of those defending Kursk. Who's commanding who? Like, who's training these guys? What are they doing? They're shooting at themselves. They're panicking. There's hysteria. Really fascinating insight into the psyche of at least some of the Russian defenders in Kursk. Right, data analysis by Reuters reveals that Russia's daily natural gas supplies to Europe actually decreased. So we're hearing that there's still Russian exports to Europe that are presently outgunning European imports from the US, but they did decrease from Russia by 2.3% in August compared to the previous year, and supposedly as Ukraine's military actions in Kursk Oblast disrupted a vital export route. So there's actually gas metering I've talked previously about how Kursk allows some much more strategic level advantages and objectives than had they put all those troops into Pokrovsk. And one such element is gas exports go through Kursk. You've got railway cargo, you've got gas, you've got all sorts of other advantages for attacking into Kursk there. So anyway, a resident of Lebedevka in Russia's Kursk shared that Ukrainians bring them everything from medicines to Coca-Cola from the, quote, Great Land. Moreover, the woman offered Ukrainian hryvnias to the defenders, but they did not take them. It's really interesting, just an anecdote from a local Kursk Russian woman that says, I said, look, can you get some yeast? I tried to give them money. They actually brought back bread and Coke, and it was Coca-Cola, and it's great. And we tried to offer them money, and they wouldn't take it, even Ukrainian hryvnias. It's like, so, okay, the Ukrainians are going to be doing a bit of psyops, or not psyops, but hearts and minds work in Kursk. That's to their advantage, but also you hope that these are just better human beings. This is the war for the Ukrainians is different from what the war is to the Russians. Now, speaking about Kursk and Pokrovsk, War Mapper said in August, Russia expanded its control in Ukraine by approximately 350 square kilometers, marking the largest monthly gain for Russia since August 2022. However, Ukraine crossed into Russia, seizing control of approximately 770 square kilometers, an area equivalent to all Russian advances since the end of April. And this is what Kursk has done. I mean, it's just a huge amount of land compared to what the Russians, even though the Russians have doubled the amount of area they're taking Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk is a smaller area than Kursk, than the Ukrainian invasion area. So, yeah, it's about perspective there. Interesting stats. Now, Vladimir Tretiak said, I just watched a video of Ukrainian veteran Vladislav Zadorin, who spent 22 months in a Russian prison. What he talks about is terrible. It's physical and mental torture on a daily basis. Please share a summary so the world understands the kind of evil Russia is. I'm just going to share some of this with you. It's just to remind you of how horrible the Russians are with the way they treat Ukrainian POWs. Quote, we spent 12 hours lying on a pier after being captured on Snake Island. It was late February. It was cold. The sea was stormy. The freezing water kept splashing on us. After arriving at the colony, we stood in the cold snow for hours, some for a few hours, others for up to 15. In the colony, they gave us a bowl of clear water with a single strand of beet in it. When we asked what it was, they said, this is your Ukrainian borscht. One guy was forced to do 1,000 squats because his heels don't touch the floor when squatting. If you run out of energy, they will use a taser. They use the taser everywhere, inside your mouths, on genitalia, and even in the rectum. The pain and adrenaline made it feel like we could climb walls. One guard beat prisoners so badly he broke over 10 bottles on my head. I now have a traumatic brain injury. The guard would beat us on the spine, trying to force a vertebrae inward. The guard had grandkids in Kharkiv in Ukraine. Wow. They gave me clothes that were deliberately too small just to mock me, even though I weighed 120 kilograms. On the way to the shower, we had to shout 1, 2, 3, 4 in German. They said we were fascist and we should shout in the language of the fascists. One guard loved the Russian band Sector Gaza. We had to sing their songs to get food. Those who refused to sing went hungry. Besides, we had to sing the Russian anthem 30 to 50 times a day. Some were sexually abused. They inserted objects into the rectum, and some were beaten to death. One prisoner's tongue was cut in two like a snake's. They would loosen teeth with pliers, so they'd fall out over time. They'd give out too little food or give some people full plates and others less. This was done to cause an animal instinct. This sometimes led to fights. It's terrifying, he said. I ate worms to survive. Protein is energy. You had to eat. You need it to survive. Some people even ate toilet paper and dipped it in soup. A nurse offered to cut our tendons so we couldn't escape. One guy slit his wrist because he wasn't exchanged. I also wanted to commit suicide. We often moved to other colonies, thinking you were moving for an exchange. When they asked for my clothing size, my heart pounded. I was afraid of being moved to another colony. I just wanted to go home. When I heard "Glory to Ukraine" in neutral territory after the exchange, I cried. It was after 22 months in captivity. After captivity, I had gallstones, brain injuries, damaged neck vertebrae, rotting fingers, and a dislocated pelvis. I weighed 120 kilograms before captivity and only 60 kilograms after. In Sumy, I was given a buckwheat soup. As I ate, I couldn't believe this was real life. No more stale bread and slop. Health and freedom are the most important things in life. It just gives you a bit of an indication there. Okay, the first underground military hospital has started operating in Ukraine. The hospital can accommodate more than 100 wounded soldiers, according to the Defense Ministry. It has surgical and intensive care units equipped according to NATO standards. So we're seeing schools get brought underground, and obviously, the more critical infrastructure that can be put underground, the safer it is. Now, just in, another Russian general has been detained. The Russian Investigative Committee has opened a criminal case against Major General Valery Muminjanov, a deputy commander of the Leningrad Military District for Logistics, for taking a large-scale bribe. Major General was arrested on the September 2nd for receiving $224,000. That's over 20 million rubles. But also, it's worth taking account of this. So, Chris Wiki thread, Russian Defense Ministry officials are coming under scrutiny in an expanding investigation into an alleged $2 billion, that's $22.3 million fraud involving the supply of low-quality bulletproof vests to the Russian military, which may have cost lives. And he does, let's read this very quickly. As previously reported, the Pickett Group of companies are under investigation for fraud. CEO Andrei Esipov, and two other company officials were arrested on suspicion of giving a bribe on the especially large scale and acting as an intermediary in the transfer of a bribe. Investigators have now reportedly established that the implementation of the state contract was accompanied by the receipt of bribes by an as yet unidentified officials in the military department. Now, we've seen a purge, remember, of some big hitters. Shoigu's deputy, lots of other people have been put away for this. My synopsis of the whole situation is that the FSB probably has dirt on every single military person, and they get rid of those people when it's useful for them to do so. They're just holding that information until the right moment. This was presumably done to ensure that Pickett would win the contract. The fraud involved the delivery of low-quality bulletproof vests. It's fairly likely that the vests were delivered to the troops, in which case it's possible that the number of Russian soldiers may have been killed or wounded as a direct result of the fraud. The Telegram channel reports that a pensioner called Semenikin, presumably an ex-official, has been put in pre-detention trial, and that arrests of serving Russian MOD officials are expected. Investigation is still ongoing. The prosecution says that not all witnesses and other accomplices to the crime have been identified and questioned. Not all items and documents relevant to the criminal case have been seized, and not all episodes of the defendant's criminal activity has been identified. So, ongoing, you might see more and more people go. This could be a genuine fraud investigation. Well, it appears to be so, but it could have been genuinely found out now, or it could have been left to the most useful time for them to do that in order to get rid of people they want to get rid of. Who knows? It's Russia. Anyway, thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all of your support. Sorry it's another long one, but some of those lost lists were absolutely massive. Speak soon.